2003. Now, the Golden Gate Bridge in San Francisco holds the disturbing record of being the #1 site in the world to commit suicide. Since it opened in 1937, more than 1,400 people are thought to have jumped to their deaths. After a decades-long campaign by loved ones left behind, the bridge authorities have agreed to erect suicide prevention nets at a cost of £45 million. The project is expected to be completed in 2018. So my 11:30 guest tonight is Kevin Hines. 15 years ago, when he was just 19, Kevin jumped off the bridge in a bid to kill himself. He was one of the lucky few who have survived to tell the tale. Kevin is now an author and motivational speaker on suicide prevention, and he began by telling me about his early life.
I was born premature. My parents were on hardcore recreational drugs when they had me. I grew up in in my infancy. It was a very tough infancy. I was very sick, physically ill, because I was taken away from my birth parents because of their illicit drug use. I was placed in foster care, bounced around from home to home to home. My brother, my only full-blooded brother, died in one of those homes. We both got the same bronchitis. He disappeared. And all of this affected me growing up. Growing up, I had a very severe detachment disorder and abandonment issues as an infant. Thus, when I got to my family, I was violently ill every single day. And the doctors came back, and the doctors said to my mom and dad, there's nothing physically wrong with this child, it's all emotional. And that was at 9 months of age. So that's just to paint the picture of how early on trauma can affect someone's psyche and their mental state. And I grew up in a beautiful home with my adopted parents, who I only call my parents. We were given a life of privilege. And at 17 and a half, I was diagnosed with a very severe brain disease, bipolar disorder type 1 with psychotic features.
And what did that mean?
What does that mean? That's the important question. It means that I had experienced extreme paranoid delusions, believing that people were out to get me, trying to hurt me, and ultimately believing that people were trying to kill me. It means that I experienced manic episodes, the highs of bipolar disorder, the two polar opposites, highs and lows. And in those highs, caused not by recreational drugs, but caused by a brain's chemistry issue, the brain neurons and synapses misfiring, I ended up doing things that made absolutely no sense, that were impossible. For example, to be very specific here, I would travel around my neighborhood and the other neighboring areas. When my father was at work, I would adorn his old suits and ties. And I would have a clipboard in hand, and I would ask people at their doors for their vote. Of course, I was 17 and a half, and they would look at me eerie-eyed, and they'd say, "Vote for what, kid?" And I said, "For the presidency of these United States of America." The problem was, because of these manic delusions of grandeur, I believed it to be possible at 17 and a half.
It is interesting to me that you've linked this in this conversation to the very early problems that you had in your life. So although you had a life of privilege with your adoptive parents, do you think there was a connection with your early abandonment and the bipolar order you later suffered?
You know, I don't think there was. I know there was. Given psychology today will tell you that the first 3 to 9 months of any infant's life, if they are traumatic in any way, will affect that child into their adulthood. It's imperative. That childhood, early childhood, is treated with very sensitive hands. It's imperative that an infant forms a bond with the mother. It's imperative that an infant forms connections with those who love them. Clearly, I had none of that. You know, I was as an infant, lying atop seedy motel room beds with my brother, barely clothed, lying next to dangerous drug paraphernalia, things that if had we touched, they would have killed us. Lying in my own filth, screaming and crying every time, mom and dad went to score drugs. They had their own battles. They had been separately diagnosed with bipolar disorder, what they called then manic depression, and they coped with their manic depression by using illicit drugs. And that's how ill they were and how they needed their mental health taken care of. But at that time, in the early 1980s, the system wasn't as built as it is today, and finding treatment plans and finding help was not as easy. It's just that simple. And so that did affect me into my adulthood. I remember, I can tell you right now, I still have abandonment issues. When someone in my life passes away of any reason, of any way, it affects me in a terrible, terrible way and puts me in a place mentally that's very unstable. And I know that you can be said that about any death in the family, but really when that happens to me, it's almost as if I feel that they left me on purpose, like they didn't want to be with me anymore. And it's a very heavy, traumatic feeling that started in my infancy.
And obviously, objectively, intellectually, you know that can't be the case, but that's how you feel emotionally.
Exactly. One of my favorite people on this planet, my great uncle Kevin, my father's uncle, the man I am named after, the guy I got the name Kevin from. He was this hero to me growing up, and he, when I was in a psychiatric ward, of which I was in many, 7 in less than 9 years up till 2011. When I was in those places, he would come every single day with a cup of soup, a comic book, and some conversation, and he would do that to help me heal. And when this almost immortal figure in my life, got pancreatic cancer and withered away, it broke me. It just broke me. And I kept saying to my wife, "Why did he leave us? Why did he leave us?" And she would say, "Kevin, he didn't leave us. He passed away because he was sick." It happens to just about everybody in some way. And grief is a very hard thing for me to tackle with my mental illness.
At the age of 17, you were diagnosed with bipolar disorder. At what point did that lead you to the Golden Gate Bridge?
So if you track back to 17 and a half, diagnosed with this mental illness, I remember thinking, why me? I don't have this brain disease. I'm not ill. I don't want to be labeled. I played football. I was a wrestling champion in high school. I was on speech and debate, albeit I was terrible, but I was on the team. How could this be my fate? And so I pretended to, and I ignored the doctor's treatment plan, although I would tell him I was doing it. I ignored my family's pleas to follow that treatment plan of therapy, meditation, exercise, proper sleep pattern, good eating habits. I ignored all of that while binge drinking on the weekends until blackout with my friends because I wanted to be a normal teenager. And that wasn't going to happen. While I'm experiencing, psychotic delusions of grandeur, I'm experiencing hallucinations, auditory and visual, hearing voices in my head, not that seemingly of my conscience, saying that you have to die, jump now. That led me, at 19 years of age, to go to the Golden Gate Bridge and attempt to take my life. And I will never forget this. And this is important for anyone suffering mentally to hear this. This is really crucial. They must understand that the millisecond that my hands left that rail, it was an instant regret. What happens in these times of great despair is that you're experiencing so much physical, emotional, and mental pain that you get to a place where you believe you need the pain to end. And it's not so much that you want to die by suicide as much as it is that you believe you have to. And those have to be recognized. People, human beings, innately want to survive all traumatic things. It is instinctual. And so when I went over that rail, in psychological terms, once again, is what's called I was shocked into reality. I was shocked into real life at that moment that I was having those hallucinations, auditory and visual, believing I had to die. And then I went over and I realized, oh, wait, I'm going to die. And that's not what I want.
Was it a spur-of-the-moment decision, though, to go to the Golden Gate Bridge? And why choose that kind of iconic structure?
Well, that's also an important question because yes, suicidal ideations and actions, whether they're thought about for a long time or a short period of time, are generally, the actual act of attempting is generally, if you're mentally unstable, is generally an impulsive one. And it was impulsive. I was on that bridge begging myself to turn around. I was on that bridge fighting the voices telling me that I had to die. And I went over, and it was an instant regret, and I thought, that's it. I'm done. I'm 19. It's over. On the way down, I only said to myself, what have I just done? I don't want to die. God, please save me. And then I hit the water. And miraculously, I opened my eyes. I was still alive. I couldn't believe it. My legs were immobile. what was I going to do now? And instead of going into those gory details, I think what's important to say is that, yes, I made it to the surface eventually from 80 feet below the water, only using my arms. I bobbed up and down in the water, and all I could do was pray as I swallowed salt water and spit it out. God, please save me. I don't want to die. God, please save me. I don't want to die. I'm not pushing faith on anyone. I'm telling you, but that's, what I had to do. And as I bobbed up and down in the water, something very large brushed by my legs. And I thought to myself, you got to be kidding me. And I say this in my speeches. I say, I didn't die off of that bridge, and a shark's going to devour me. Perfect. And I said that on a national television show here in San Francisco a year after my attempt in support of a foundation that was raising awareness and funds for suicide prevention. And I said this to this host of this show. And this show went viral online when that was kind of a new thing. And a guy wrote into the show of many who wrote in. And he said, Kevin, I was less than 2 feet away from you when you jumped. He said, no one would tell me if you lived or died. It has haunted me until this day that I saw this show. He said, by the way, you mentioned you thought there was a shark. There was no shark, but there was a sea lion. And we above looking down believed it to be bumping you up, keeping you afloat until the Coast Guard boat arrived behind you. It blew me away. I knew something was there.
Absolutely incredible. And
I knew I wasn't hallucinating that. I knew that was real. And I just didn't know what it was.
Do you now believe, by whatever agency was at work, that sea lion was sort of bumping you up, keeping you alive?
Well, here's what I know. I have a friend who's a bit of a scientist, or he claims to be anyway, and he says that what happened to me was just a statistical anomaly. Basically, it had to happen to someone. But I will tell you that I've learned of sea creatures all over the world that have come to the aid of humans and literally saved their lives. In this instance, I can only believe because of the way my faith is built in me since I was a child, certainly, and what I believe in. I know it was a miracle. I know it was a part of a miracle. But that's not the end of it. I mean, when I went over the rail, a woman driving by in a red car saw me go over, had a cell phone, and called her friend in the Coast Guard. That's the only reason the Coast Guard arrived to me within less than the time I would set in hypothermia and drown.
So an incredible coincidence that the motorist just happened to have a friend who was in the Coast Guard.
I call it fate. I mean, and I know this story because she happened to be, and this Coast Guard gentleman happened to be, two of the best friends of my high school band teacher.
Just to get some scale of the unlikelihood of you surviving, since 1937, more than 1,400 people are thought to have jumped to their deaths from the Golden Gate Bridge. Just 34 people, 1% of those who have jumped, have survived, and you are one of them.
That's right, and I'm blessed to be one of them. And I'll tell you that number is far below the real number, and I'll tell you why. I work a lot with a guy named Kevin Briggs. He is what they call the guardian of the Golden Gate Bridge, and he is the former Highway Patrol sergeant who apparently saved about 200 lives from jumping off of that bridge. He was very good at it. He was very good at listening to those who suffered, and over the period of 2, 3, 4 hours, bringing them back over the rail to safety and then into psychiatric emergency services. And what he has told me is that the number, for example, in 2014, they recorded a number of 46 deaths off the Golden Gate Bridge. They said it was the highest that had ever occurred. That's not true. What he'll tell you, and what the former Marine coroner will tell you, and they're trying to be quiet now, is that at the time they thought there was 46. When they announced 46 deaths in 2014, he said, according to his records, it was more like 60. And he said that was the same for every year in the past, that no matter what they reported, they deflated the number to make it less of a problem publicly. So if you think about that, and you realize that it's still the number one suicide spot in the world, and you realize that probably, guys, more than 2,000 people have died off of that bridge, a lot because the ones they don't pick up out of the water, the ones they don't find, the bodies that are eaten by fish, the bodies that are washed away to be forgotten, disappear, and those real numbers are astronomically larger than the ones they report.
I'm asking this question not for any gruesome reason, but just because I think because there is such a rate of suicide from that bridge, I think it's a natural question that our listeners will be asking tonight on 5 Live. How easy was it to get over the bridge and jump off?
You know, that's the biggest mistake the engineers of that bridge made. Yeah, it's a beautiful bridge. Yeah, it's the ninth wonder of the world. It's also a harbinger of death. It's a 4-foot rail. Ease of access to lethal means. We know that one of the only ways to prevent suicide globally is reduction of access to lethal means. And that is why my father founded the Bridge Rail Foundation, so that they could build the net at the Golden Gate Bridge, which was just approved June 27th last year. The funding has been allocated. The bid went out actually this month for contractors. They're going to build it by 2018. It took 80 years to right that wrong. 80 years of death. 80 years too long.
So this net is going to be built, I think, at a cost of some £45 million to prevent people doing what you did. But for you, it literally was a case of scaling over a 4-foot wall and having the expanse of water below you.
I jumped over the wall, the 4-foot rail. I leapt all the way over the rail, easily. And it needs to be stopped so that people like me who suffer terribly mentally, who have no real knowledge of what their death by suicide will do to everyone left in their path that loves them. You know, Norman Farborough, the father of suicide prevention, the father of suicidology as it stands today, said that for every suicide, 6 people are directly affected. That is a mistake. For every suicide, hundreds of people are directly affected. When I jumped, and of course I lived, I affected everyone I knew, all of my family, all of my friends, all of my acquaintances, and all of their acquaintances. I still get letters from people that I haven't talked to in years, that are just mustering up the courage to say, you know, why didn't you call me that day? I know for a fact that if I put together everyone in a room that was affected by my attempt alone, it would stand, somewhere between 200 and 500 people or more. And that's why, that's why when I realized I could become this, ambassador of hope for people. I mean, I started speaking about this issue, about this story in 2001, 7 months after my attempt. There I was, standing on the steps of my church with my father, and the priest came out, and he said, "Kevin, will you come talk to our kids on Good Friday about your experience?" I looked at him and I said, "Father, I don't have a speech and I wouldn't know what to say." And my father, and I'm 5'7", so you get an idea of how tall or short I am, my father took his oven mitt-sized hands, he shoved me forward, and he's 6'1", and he said, "You'll do it." And I looked at my dad like, "What are you doing? I don't want to do this." And he looked down at me and said, "You'll do it. We need closure." And that's just the kind of guy my dad is. And the priest said, I looked at the priest, I said, "Hey, Father, I'll see you on Good Friday." It was a reluctant move into trying to help people. I didn't understand how it would help or if it would help. But I went to this speech on Good Friday. The night before, till 3 a.m., I wrote a speech until 3 in the morning. It was 17 pages long. It took me 45 minutes to read aloud. And there I was, in front of these kids, reading aloud from the page like a buffoon, and I didn't think it was going to help anybody. I remember thinking in my head as I was reading the speech, who am I helping? I got 120 letters from the 120 kids in the room 2 weeks later, and several of those kids were actively suicidal. And those kids got the help they needed because those letters were screened because they were minors, because their teachers and their staff realized the importance of suicide prevention at a very early time.
And yet, Kevin, although you quite quickly after this astonishing escape were telling young people about it and hopefully encouraging them to think of an alternative to suicide, you were not cured, were you?
Oh, God, no. Not even close. I never will be. They will never find a cure for this disease. If they do, it will blow me away. No, there's no cure for this disease yet, and I doubt there will be. What there is now is the ability to cope with it with treatment. But I was in and out of treatment for the next, from 2001 until 2011. I would cycle back and through and in and out of psych wards because of suicidal ideation. But I will tell you, at my third psych ward stay, I will never forget that on my mom's side, my Uncle George came to the hospital. He looked right at me across from the cafe table as these people were all around us in psychiatric distress. He looked at me and he said, "What are you doing?" He said, "Kevin, we can fight for your wellness until we're blue in the face. But until you accept that you have a mental illness, and until you take responsibility for your wellness, nothing will change." And it was like I had this epiphany. For that period of time, I've been in and out of psych wards 3 times, all involuntarily, all me taken away from my family and put in a psych ward. And it was when he told me this and when he left the psych ward, when he left and I couldn't, when those doors locked again, I had this epiphany. I said, I have to fight for my mental wellness. Who else is going to? And from that point forward, when I needed to be in a psychiatric safe place, I admitted myself for the next 4 psychiatric treatments, meaning I voluntarily walked into clinics and said, I have to go to a hospital right now or I'm going to be 6 feet under the ground. At one of those instances, I think it was my 4th psych ward stay, I walked right into my mental health clinic here in San Francisco. I looked at my therapist and I said, I have to go in the hospital right now because if I don't, I'll be dead. And it was that self-awareness that allowed me the privilege of now talking to you today, because otherwise I'd be dead.
Let me ask you about the physical impact of that jump as well. Were you hurt?
Chronic back pain. That doesn't bother me at all because I'm alive. I shattered my T12, L1, and L2 lower vertebrae into shards like glass. They splintered and popped throughout my insides, lacerating some of me internally, cutting up my insides. The doctor, and this is another piece of the miracle, by the way, the doctor wasn't supposed to be there that day. He had a schedule that was going to take him away from that hospital I ended up in for that surgery after the jump. And he happened to stay for whatever reason, not because of me, because he stayed for his own volition. And he opted to do my surgery. 14 hours later, and after I had almost a seizure under anesthesia because there wasn't enough of an asthma attack, with the scalpel in my belly, he maneuvered it out of me without lacerating me again. They put me down under more, and they went in, and 14 hours later, they had restructured my back with a titanium-fitted cylindrical cage, a metal plate, and 4 pins to hold it all together. That's the only reason I get the privilege of walking every day. Walking, running, jumping, albeit never off anything tall, but you get the picture.
There you go. That's Kevin Hines. And if you've been affected by anything in that interview, you can contact the Samaritans round the clock on 08457 90 90 90. After midnight, the papers are coming in, and as you'd expect, several are still leading on the week's plane crash in the French Alps. The actress Karuna Stammel and the former Tory MP Jerry Hayes will be here to review all of them in just a moment.